What's up, everybody? It's your boy B. Scott with the Philadelphia Eagles. I just want to thank you all for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating. Fly, Eagles, fly.
All right, thanks for tuning in to Eagles Brawl of the Brawl Network. However you're listening, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get the pod. We greatly appreciate it. I'm joined now by NBC Sports, Rotoworld's lead college football and NFL draft analyst, Thor Nystrom, joining the show to talk about the Eagles rookies. Thor, thanks for joining the show, my guy.
Good to be here, Connor. Appreciate it.
Appreciate you joining the show. So, on my old podcast, we talked about a lot about the rookies in the upcoming class, and two of the players that we talked about we've talked about Reagor and Hurts pretty well on my old previous podcast, but now they became Philadelphia Eagles, so I can't wait to dive into you about how you feel about them and how you feel about their fit with the team. Let's just start off with Jalen Reagor. The speed, the dynamic, the playmaking ability, something the Eagles lacked in the wide receiver corps last year. They don't really have a long-term option outside of him. What do you think about Jalen Reagor joining the Eagles? Do you think it's a good fit?
Yeah, I think it's a great fit. Yeah, Reagor, tested, you talk about like adding athleticism to the offense. He tested in the 93rd percentile, and I think me and everyone else that does this thinks that Reagor did not test as well as he probably could have or should have. Some guys just have a bad day at the combine. I think he's even more athletic than he showed in Indy. Truly one of the most explosive players coming out of college football last year. And if you put Reagor in, Alabama, LSU, one of these other Oklahoma, one of these other wide open passing offenses, I think you're talking about a guy who could have, he definitely would have competed for the Biletnikoff Award, but, who knows, maybe even for the Heisman, some of these past couple of years. He was a stud in college football, and Connor, you're going to know this stat, but there's a PFF stat about, on target balls thrown to you, over the course of the season or whatever. Jalen Reagor of the pass receiver class had by far the lowest percentage of any receivers, like 33% of the balls thrown his way were catchable, or on target. Whereas a guy like Justin Jefferson, I think he was in the 70s, in terms of percentage of balls that were thrown on target to him. So, Reagor did not have the opportunities that a lot of other guys in this class did, merely because quarterback play was not good over the past couple of years at TCU. But I think Philadelphia smartly saw that there's a lot more potential than you could see in sort of his just baseline numerical profile.
So when he first originally got drafted, obviously everybody thought the Eagles were going to go ahead and get Justin Jefferson, or he was mostly widely mocked to the Eagles. The Eagles go ahead and take Reagor over him in that instance. A lot of people were worried because there's draft reports out there that compared him to Nelson Aguilar. There's scouting reports that say drops are an issue. When I look back at his tape, I don't know about you, but I know last year he had 7 drops, and he even had his opening presser with the Eagles that said, I got to work on the drop situations, I got to work on my concentration drops. But the year prior, he had 131 targets and 4 drops. I think the difference between Sean Robinson and Max Duggan was probably, I think Sean put a lot more touch on the football, per se, and I think he was the better quality quarterback, to be completely honest with you. Duggan was a true freshman quarterback who we're not even sure if he belongs as a starting quarterback in college football yet up to this point. Going off of last year, that's absolutely not the case, but I think that plays into it a little bit. I think that people exaggerate his drop issues a little bit, but I know he even alluded to himself that he does have concentration drop issues. But to me, I believe you compared him to Brandon Cooks, and that's something that the Eagles need in their offense. They need the playmaking type wide receiver because Deshaun Jackson's hitting on 34 years old. Outside of that, they have nothing, and I know we're going to get into it later in the draft because they added some other speed guys, but to me, I think this is the perfect guy. I was so high on Jalen Reagor anyways. On 27 contested catch receptions last year, which was most of any first-round wide receiver. You just see how he plays outside of his frame, outside of his size. I think playing with the inaccurate quarterback play, if anything, helped him become even a more polished pro because he catches so many balls outside his frame. You wouldn't believe it until you turn on his film.
Absolutely. Yeah, and again, talking for a guy, it was 31% of the balls last year were thrown on target for him, in comparison to some of these other guys who were, all the other first-round guys really were in the 60 percentiles, but CeeDee Lamb was 59. But yeah, totally. Because you have to bail those balls out, right? Like, you're going to learn a skill that way. And, Reagor, even though, for his profile, the way he plays, his athleticism, stuff like that, you might think that he would just be a pure slot guy, but he's actually not. Like, at TCU, he played predominantly on the outside. That's where he was last year, whatever. And you talk about the difference between, Jefferson and Reagor, the evals. I'm not sure what the Eagles saw in that. But, we've seen in recent days reports coming out of Philadelphia that Reagor's practicing on the outside. That's where he played last year at TCU, and like you mentioned, like he had to salvage a lot of bad balls. And I think once he finds a quarterback with accuracy, both the arm strength, of course, to get him the ball wherever he needs to get it, because he can win at all three levels of the field, but also the accuracy so he doesn't have to, on every play, be slowing down or, trying to catch a ball behind him or one-handed or, whatever. Once he finds a quarterback who can hit him on the hands when he's in stride, we're going to see Jalen Reagor really level up. And we saw that a couple years back. He's already shown on the Big 12 field. Last year, it was just an issue of quarterback play where if you're just not even getting it close, the numbers are going to dip a little bit. But it is what it is. But yeah, I like the fit a lot. And again, go back to the reports out of Philadelphia. Reagor's been playing on the outside. He's been practicing on the outside. And obviously they got Jackson in the slot. And Philadelphia obviously made a determination during the draft they were going to keep him. I'm not sure what they saw, as far as Justin Jefferson, is Justin Jefferson confined to the slot? Is that something that Philadelphia thought? I'm not sure. Minnesota's certainly going to try to play Jefferson on the outside because they play a lot of two wide receiver sets, with Rudolph and Irv Smith. So I'm not sure if Philadelphia was just sort of sitting dead red on the improved athleticism outside. You mentioned a couple of guys we'll talk about later, both burners that they took later on. Maybe that was a part of the thing with Reagor. Maybe it was that they thought, it was a smoother transition to playing outside because that's what he played last year. But, either way, I think it's a good fit for a team that needed wide receiver playmaking on the outside, but specifically more athleticism in that receiving core.
Right, I think they just wanted to take the bet on the playmaker for once instead of going with the safe option because that just hasn't worked out for them in the past. And, Jefferson's great and everything like that, but it's more of what they have already. They need somebody that could be like a playmaker downfield, and especially with how you study the game and have you, I know you're very familiar with North Dakota State. Watching Carson Wentz's deep ball accuracy each year as a pro steadily improves. Last year, I want to go back to week one when he had Deshaun Jackson. He those air yards he put into that pass that those 2 touchdown passes to Jackson were 40 yards plus. So to get a guy like Reagor who's definitely going to get that separation downfield and then finally have that quarterback that can get it to him. Who knows how long it's going to be now with the Eagles win with their second round pick, but I like the fit with Wentz and Reagor. I think that's the perfect quarterback wide receiver fit. And then I just think another thing that sets Reagor apart is the NFL pedigree with his father playing football. I think he knows what it takes to be an NFL player because he saw his dad put in the work and dedication to be a longtime pro, Super Bowl champion. To me, I was completely on board with them taking Reagor over Jefferson. I know the initial shock was throughout the fan base and throughout really the media world was the fact that they passed on the proven polished guy in Justin Jefferson. But I just think that's what the Eagles have been so accustomed to, especially with, you consider last year when they drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. That's really what they did with that pick. They took the established wide receiver at that pick instead of really what maybe fit their personal needs per se. So maybe that's why this time around they shied away from Justin Jefferson and went with a playmaker. Because I don't know about you, but from my perspective, looking at the league, when a rookie wide receiver is transitioning, the guys that have the playmaking ability usually have the smoother transitions than the guys that have to win press coverage or physical type guys. Is that something that you see as well? You believe?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think receivers that come into the NFL where their calling card is contested catches. Generally, that's sort of a code word for they don't quite have the juice to create separation in college, or else they wouldn't be in so many contested situations. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I would agree with the sentiment in general, for sure.
Just throwing in here a wild card real quick, because I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. Last year, where were you on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside? Because he came to Philadelphia, and I'm sure you're aware it completely stunk up the place. What were you thinking of him coming out of Stanford?
Yeah, I don't think I was as high on him as the Eagles ended up using, in terms of draft equity. Mm-hmm. Obviously, at Stanford, he was a jump ball guy. That was Stanford has a really weird offense.
Very weird. Yeah.
David Shaw, he sort of has the NFL thing, but they went, especially after Bryce Love's injury and stuff like that, it became just this jump ball offense where they just send big guys down the field. And so I think my concern for Arcega-Whiteside was there's a little bit of athletic limitations there, and you're winning on a bunch of rebounds against Pac-12 defensive backs.
Yes.
So in the NFL, when you're not going to be able to just use your frame, and the athleticism, it's going to play down just a bit, because everyone else is going to get more athletic, obviously, at the next level. My concern for him was that the game might not completely translate. But it's early for him. Like I try not to judge rookies, or guys coming into the league until a couple of years in. But yeah, certainly a tough acclimation process for him. For sure.
Absolutely, I agree with you completely. That's exactly what I've been saying. Because when you win in those contested situations, when you're a jump ball enthusiast, it's nice and all. But when you're in the Pac-12, not facing a ton of press coverage, that's a whole different ball game when you get to the NFL. So I agree with you on that sentiment. But let's segue into this Jalen Hurts shock. Obviously, that was probably the most biggest shock of that whole entire 2020 draft. The Eagles taking Jalen Hurts in the second round. With your best you had the best comparison in the draft community for sure with the Ricky Rubio comparison. I completely understand it in the context of what you meant, and I believe that to be incredibly true. What are your feelings about Hurts behind Wentz and Peterson and the whole entire offensive personnel company in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so speaking to the Ricky Rubio comp, which, I just thought it was too perfect, and I just had to do it for comedy reasons once I thought of it. But, Hurts is a guy, and I'll say this too in advance. I'm coming to you guys from Minneapolis. Like, I'm a Timberwolves fan. I'm one of the very few diehard Minnesota Timberwolves fans. And so, like, Ricky Rubio coming up, like, I watched all his games coming up and, like, stuff like that, and, his first several years in the league before – he finally left the Timberwolves or whatever. But I just saw, overall in terms of the way that, Rubio's game is and the way that Hurts's evaluation was, from watching the last couple of years, I just saw some striking similarities where, Rubio's a guy who tremendous passer, he plays pretty solid defense. He's sort of solid everywhere except for shooting. He can't shoot downtown. So like, players would always play off of him by quite a bit. And what was frustrating as a Timberwolves fan during Ricky Rubio's formative years is that the Timberwolves would surround him with like these wing players that they take like 6-7 overall every single year that were good slashers but couldn't shoot. And so, Rubio was always sort of, he wasn't given space, but he could sort of create looks for other players, by hitting them with these passes. But then they were not players that, would just shoot it up or whatever. If they got an open look and shoot a three, then they were looking to drive it or whatever. And so it just wasted what Rubio was good at. In the same way with Jalen Hurts, he does some very specific things very, very, very well. And he does one thing very poorly. The things he does well is, very good mobility, and in a slightly different way than we've seen, in the past, with, Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and then going back to Michael Vick. It's a bit different in terms of mobility where Hurts is, he's got the athleticism, not as quite as high octane as those guys, but what he is, he's a former Texas high school state, champion power lifter. And that's what he was doing since he was a kid or whatever. And so he's got the power behind it too. Whereas, some of those guys are more like, you watch them in the open field, it's more like watching a kick returner. Whereas Hurts is more of like a, true like halfback that can sort of, bowl people over when he needs to or whatever. The other thing that Hurts is really good at is short and intermediate, especially intermediate section of the field. Was an absolute killer in the intermediate sector in college. In part because of his, the way he plays, and then also the way that facilitated to the offensive skill talent around him, and the way that both those Alabama and Oklahoma played offense, where it became a lot of you're talking about read option, RPOs, and then once you get the defense just terrified of the run game, because they always were against Alabama and Oklahoma. Hurts was really, really good at just sticking his foot in the dirt right up the play fake and just hitting someone right in stride, streaking across the intermediate sector. That's something you can see him doing with Reagor. If the Eagles ever go fully to this style of offense, because they're going to have to change their offense if Hurts ever takes over full time. I think he can get by, in just a normal situation, just coming in, injury type thing. But if you want Jalen Hurts to succeed to his full ability, in my estimation, it's always been a thing where you're going to have to sort of recater the offense to look sort of like The Titans had that thing a couple years ago where they would talk about exotic smash mouth football. It became sort of a joke. But the offense that I would see Jalen Hurts succeeding for in the NFL would look like sort of what I think of what an exotic smash mouth system would look like, where it would be sort of up-tempo. You would have 3 receivers on the field. You'd have a lot of motion, and then you'd be doing a lot of RPOs, read options,
right.
Play action fakes, stuff like that. And with the run game, you're running up tempo, everything like that. You could just pound people. And what Hurts is not good at is throwing the ball down the field. He doesn't have a bazooka for an arm, number one. And while he's really good at, again, short, intermediate accuracy and stuff like that, like I said, just 1-2 steps and then putting his foot in the dirt and then letting her rip with the guy who's got a couple steps on the defender. In terms of downfield, it's both an arm limitation and then just a reading defense thing. It just seems like Hurts is far less comfortable when it's like, 1 beat, 2 beat, 3 beat, 4 beat. He's sort of tapping the ball and then he's sort of waiting for routes to progress. That's not his comfort zone. His comfort zone is just playing up tempo, getting the defense back on their heels, and then play action, hit someone. And he could do that. He could do that all day. So, if he ever became the guy long term, that's how you would want to sort of recater your offense. But in terms of throwing deep, I just don't ever see him being that kind of a guy. But again, it's just like Ricky Rubio, when he has the right offense around him, when he's in the right system, that will succeed. You can absolutely cater a system around a player with the strengths that Jalen Hurts has. And I haven't even mentioned yet, he doesn't turn the ball over, period. He doesn't fumble it. He doesn't throw interceptions. And the reason is because he understands the limitations. He understands that he's not the best at reading sort of these advanced coverage looks downfield, waiting, whatever, like sort of nuanced throwing guys open. And then he also understands his arm strength limitations as well. So he knows what he's good at. He stays within his own game. And I think if an NFL team tailored sort of an offensive scheme around him, and then also sort of surrounded him with players that sort of fit that, which they could, and Reagor, I think absolutely does. Again, going back to like an Alabama, Oklahoma type receiver, he absolutely is. I think that could work. But, I think initially, you mentioned, people questioning that pick. I didn't. I think maybe I was one of the few guys that didn't. It's not like I got up and celebrated it, but I thought that's absolutely where he should have been picked. And for, the Eagles, you talk about like NFL teams, quarterbacks have a lot of value, right? Like they're always going to have trade value, and you need 2 of them. You just do. And so I don't see what the issue is with picking a quarterback in the second round who, if nothing else, is going to be an awesome locker room guy. He's going to be an awesome sub-package guy. He's probably going to be a coach someday. And as far as being a backup quarterback in the NFL, at very minimum, he should be an okay backup. He should retain trade value as well, unless he just absolutely falls on his face. And if he excels, going the other way, he's absolutely going to be worth his draft equity. Whether you trade Wentz, you trade him, I think it's just going to work out. But you're going to have to, whether it's salary cap money, whether it's draft equity, you're going to have to devote some money into the backup quarterbacks. Every team does, unless you just want to put yourself in a really bad situation. And the Eagles now have done so in such a way where they retain trade value potentially in future trade markets. And I just think that's really important. I don't think it's a deal where you just sink a round 2 pick into a guy, and if Carson Wentz remains healthy and playing really well, that you just lose the asset in Hurts. You don't at all. You got a really good backup quarterback. You got a guy who's going to be awesome in some packages. You potentially have a guy who can take over down the road, or certainly with injuries, whatever. And you also have a guy you could potentially trade, right, in a year or 2 if everything goes well with Wentz. So, I was totally fine with the Jalen Hurts pick.
So I'm loving some of these points because I've been saying for months ever since this pick happened that the Eagles must feel like when they went back and won the Super Bowl, what changed with them the most was they switched the offense to an RPO type system for Nick Foles to operate like he did with Chip Kelly, and that's what won the Super Bowl. So that's why I'm thinking if the Eagles are taking Hurts here, they're thinking this is the perfect guy to run the RPO system, and he brings mobility to it, whereas Nick Foles didn't. So here's my thing, though. A lot of people think that this could be some kind of thing where Hurts comes in and then potentially might take Carson Wentz's job, which, who knows? It's just too early to tell because, again, the durability issues are there with Carson Wentz. To me, though, I think Jalen Hurts is a good quarterback. I think he can be a starting quarterback in the league, like you said, if you build the offense and tailor it to his leisure. Because the arm, I think, it's a lot of mechanics with him. Again, I think he was 3 seconds getting the ball out last year, which would have been dead last in the NFL. It has to be out way faster than that. So that little hitch that he has in his throw, I'm wondering how Press Taylor and Doug Peterson are gonna focus in on that with him. But the footwork is amazing. The mobility is there. You have to take his mobility as a threat. If Carson Wentz goes down, though, I don't think that Jalen Hurts can necessarily come in and take the Eagles' job from him. I just don't think he's on the caliber that Carson Wentz is. And a lot of it has to do with arm talent is why I believe so. But I agree with you. I mean, the Eagles are in a cap situation where they're completely screwed next year. And in the years prior, I mean, you're paying all this money to Carson Wentz. You can't really allocate a ton of resources to the quarterback room when you're already paying a huge contract as is. I just think the simple facts behind this pick were, like you just said, trade value, because you could always get a good trade value, especially at a quarterback with a potential like Hurts. And the Eagles wanted a good caliber backup where they don't have to pay a huge salary to. I don't think this is any indictment on Wentz. I don't think it has anything to do with Wentz long term. If he does get hurt again, and who knows, maybe there's an Andrew Luck situation with Carson Wentz because he's a brand new father and injuries have piled on him in his career, even dating back in North Dakota State, then the Eagles are in a good situation. I struggled to find, as at first when that first pick was announced, I was like, oh my God, they used this pick on backer quarterback, because to me there's just no way that they decommit from Carson Wentz unless he just dramatically drops off the face of the earth or just gets injured and can't play that much anymore. But now with all the time pass, reading the tea leaves, seeing what kind of player Hurts can be in this offense, especially in the RPO system, I think the Eagles can definitely, if they were in a position where they were being the first seed and Carson Wentz goes down, they can continue their momentum with inserting Jalen Hurts in the RPO type system. But I just think it's simple that he's here to back up Wentz, and I mean, I know that's just talking. I don't really know if that's going to be the case because Carson Wentz can obviously go down, but I just don't think there's going to be a situation where if he does go down that Jalen Hurts comes on the field and proves to the Eagles that he should be handed the job, because I just don't think he's on the caliber of Carson Wentz. I think he's a good quarterback, but I just don't think he's on Carson Wentz's caliber.
Well, I mean, certainly not now, right?
Mm-hmm, right.
Certainly not now. This is a guy who needs a little bit of time. He has these specific skills, but in terms of like sitting back in an NFL pocket, even if it's in a thing where, Jalen Hurts' rushing ability combined with his RPO and his read option ability, which are tremendous. I mean, whatever running back gets to work with Jalen Hurts in the future, Jalen Hurts becomes an NFL starting quarterback, is a very lucky dude. Especially if, an offense sort of changes to cater, like I was talking about earlier, to Hurts' ability. But yeah, I mean, initially, no. I mean, he's not close to Carson Wentz right now. And I think for people that are judging the pick sort of through that, prism or that paradigm, I don't think they're judging it as the Eagles intended it. I don't think the pick at all was an indictment of Carson Wentz. Again, there's other factors going on, there. I think NFL fans, they have, and maybe this is just people in general, with life, but they have a tendency to be sort of myopic when they look at someone else's decision and sort of just boil it down to one factor. And in this case, it was like, Eagles used their second pick on a quarterback, therefore, it must be they're saying something about Carson Wentz. Well, I don't think so. It's not an asset that depreciates. It's not like buying a new car and you drive it off the lot and it's worth half as much. You take a quarterback who has tools, in the second round, as long as he shows something whenever he gets on the field, he's going to have some level of trade value. Taysom Hill, who is just, at best, just sort of a homeless man's Jalen Hurts, he has trade value, right? Just because of some of the stuff that he's showing on the field. And he's only thrown, 12 NFL passes to this point? Right. Jalen Hurts can do everything that Taysom Hill can do, in terms of Taysom Hill-y things, but he's a much better thrower. Right, so that player is worth more, or is worth at least a second-round pick. If Jalen Hurts proves that he can, sort of get over some of these thresholds and get past some of these event horizons that I'm talking about, in terms of being an NFL quarterback, things like you're talking about, I don't know if they're ever going to be able to solve the loopy delivery, but they didn't solve it with Phillip Rivers and stuff like that. True. He's just going to have to learn different sort of mechanisms to get around that, and things like reading the defense better, reading some of these exotic coverages better, being able to make plays maybe just a little bit further downfield or recognize single coverage, on one side when he's got one of these burners going deep, whatever, stuff like that might help him be able to compensate for some of that stuff and improve that value. But, I think right now, like, his value around the NFL would probably be a second-round pick. If the Eagles were just to be like, Jalen Hurts is available, everybody, I'm sure they could field a future second-round offer for him. So, again, just by definition, the pick is fine, especially because he has a utility to next year's team as a backup quarterback and sub-package player, and as far as the association with Carson Wentz, if Carson Wentz gets injured, tremendous, right? Like, you just devoted a little bit of draft resources, not even that much money, cap room, just a little bit of draft resources to bring in that guy, and then he plays. If he plays well, you improve your chances of winning. He also improves potentially his trade value. So, to me, it's fine because Carson Wentz does have durability issues. So you need a number 2 guy, right? Like, you're not convinced that Carson Wentz is going to go 16 games every year, so you needed that kind of a guy. I'm totally fine with it as opposed to paying, whatever Chase Daniels has made in his lifetime. Right?
Yeah.
Because Eagles fans, you need to understand that, right? Like, if you're not going to pay the second-round pick, you have to pay a different way, right? And the other way is overpaying on your cap room for a number 2 quarterback, which is fine. You can do that, but it's just a switching of resources. Then you could have used that second pick on a different position, but then you're going to have to sink that money into an overpriced quarterback. So, again, there's a lot of different factors that go into all these picks, but for me, Jalen Hurts sort of is an appropriate price for exactly what he is, and he's an asset, just looking at it from like a stock market perspective, that would have the chance of going up, if he did well, if Wentz got injured, the looks you see in camp, in training camp games, et cetera, preseason games once we get him back. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, that's a great take, though. That's a perfect perspective. I really agree listening to that. I can't wait for people to hear this. All the sub packages and stuff like that. To me, I'm not a big fan of that stuff because I think it kills momentum of lots of offensive drives. But I mean, the 2-point conversion, if that starts coming more on normality, then you have Jalen Hurts out there for the 2-point conversion. I'm all for that. I think the Eagles might roll with some of that. I'm not sure if they're gonna. I can't see the Taysom Hill type stuff. I just don't think that's the type of. Maybe some quarterback draws, maybe some quarterback run options, but I don't see them really incorporating as much as like the hype was about the Taysom Hill type packages when the pick was announced. But that was really great perspective. I agree with you. I think long term this. No matter what, is going to pay off for the Eagles in some sort of way, some sort of fashion, to make Howie Roseman look smarter than dumber than what the opinion seems to be, because some Eagles fans are still against it, and then you got some people thinking Hurts going to take Wentz's job. So great to hear your perspective on that. But let's keep moving on. So Colorado, one of our favorite places, because Laviska Shenault is one of my favorite prospects. I can't wait to see him and DJ Shark and Gardner Minshew have fun this year in Jacksonville with the little talent they have around them. But they also had another player who was very raw in Davion Taylor, who I thought they also used in an odd manner, just like Shenault. What is your take on Davion Taylor?
He's a very interesting prospect. Boomer bust for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely boomer bust. I mean, what he is a freak athlete.
Right.
I mean, that's at this point that's really all that he is. He's for his size and his frame, he's much faster and athletic than he should be. He was a guy who was on Colorado's track team and all this different stuff, and he has sort of elements in his game of like of a linebacker, sort of like linebacker size, but he sort of has the safety mentality, but he sort of is as fast as a cornerback,
mm-hmm.
kind of like. So you just have this stuff that's all over the place, but he didn't play as much football as many other prospects that were drafted this year. And when he did, at the FCS level at Colorado, he didn't acquit himself, as well as some other players that were drafted in his range. But again, you're talking about a guy who doesn't have as much field experience than some of these other guys, so he's much rawer. But what he does bring is NFL caliber athleticism. And, we see guys like this that are, you could say overdrafted in the moment just because they're sort of drafted over, whether it's their statistical profile, how well they played in college, et cetera. But, it's a thing where, a couple of years down the line, if you have a guy, that sort of fills out an athletic profile that can fill a role on your roster one way or the other, some of these guys then play up. So it's not an overdraft anymore. Like, Willie Gay is another example from this class of a guy who, he didn't play a ton. It was for different reasons, in Willie Gay's case. But Willie Gay was just a tremendous athlete. In the linebacker crew, he was number 2 behind Isaiah Simmons. So he went in the second round to Kansas City, even though he basically only had like one season of snaps, like all together at Mississippi State, if you put them all together. So, but like guys that are as athletically gifted as Taylor, they're going to go, day 1 or day 2. And so the Eagles took a shot on him. They're going to have to do a lot of work with him. But again, you have a guy who has just incredible physical ability, who has these different elements in his game. So that, we'll see what the Eagles can turn him into. But I'm sure the defensive, the staff there is going to have a lot of fun trying to figure out what exactly he is.
His athletic profile seems to be where the NFL is going at the linebacker position. That's pretty much all I can go on that, and that's really what only makes me excited about him. Because, again, watching his Colorado film, it's just I've never seen anything like it. So unorthodox to watch this guy go cover the slot and look like he's so out of position. But, again, the athletic profile is definitely where I would feel the NFL's heading at linebacker position. So hopefully that they can develop and pan out. I'm not incredibly confident because this team doesn't really develop linebackers that well. So we'll see, but the athletic profile definitely makes you excited for his potential for sure. I'm glad you clarified, Brian. You think like taking the risk in the third round is worth it because of how teams really jump for that athletic profile. I think that's really what the case was here, and I think it's more justified just because of those reasons. Because he went over a guy like Akeem Davis-Gaither, who I thought was the better linebacker. So that's why I was kind of like, I don't know about this, but you're right. You have to invest a higher pick in those type of athletic profiles if you want to just use that projection. So I agree with that. That's a good take. But again, yeah, go ahead.
No, just, to your point, Davis Gaither on the field way better. We call it way, way, way better. But, he's a guy who's smaller. His athletic profile, isn't tremendous or whatever. So, you have to do projection the other way, right? Because now he's going to be facing all, these superior athletes. He's going to be facing much bigger offensive linemen, can't get out blocks in the NFL, et cetera. Taylor doesn't have those questions, but the questions come from the other direction. And so one way or the other, you're going to take something of a risk. But if you're betting on athleticism, in the NFL draft, you're going to be right more than you're wrong, than when you're just betting on the stat guys that didn't test well. So in terms of that, I'm philosophically, I'm with the Eagles there.
I agree with you as well. That's a great point. But let's segue into this: the speed, and more speed. The Eagles' philosophy heading into this draft. Apparently, they got John Hightower and Quez Watkins as well. They're already flashing. Carson Wentz worked out in Houston with Quez Watkins, and that connection's already flashing in training camp already. What do you make of these two? What are your thoughts on these guys?
They're just burners.
Yeah.
They both have very similar profiles. Just like there's sort of a group of these guys that were gonna, sort of mid-day 3 kind of guys, like in the draft. Darnell Mooney was another guy who went to the Bears. Mm-hmm. But just sort of these outside burner guys, with 4.3 wheels. And Hightower and Watkins, very, very similar in that regard. Obviously, they both come from the G5, and they were used sort of in similar ways. They're just pop-to-top guys, and so you're hoping, to harken back a little bit NFC East, you're hoping that you find an Alvin Harper type, that can stay on the field and just sort of force the safeties back, because then they can create space on the other side of the field, right? That's what the Raiders just hope that they lock that in with Henry Ruggs. You hope that you have the best evolution of that, where it tilts the field. Then these other guys sort of, in the next phylum of the straight line speed burner type guys, like Quez, Hightower, Mooney, that sort of phylum or whatever. You're just hoping that you find, a solid guy, a solid number 2 would be perfect. But, if nothing else, just a guy that when he's on the field, he forces the defense to respect him in some way. You inch the safety back a little bit, create some space, or if they don't respect the speed, you try to pop the top deep.
Yeah, the Eagles desperately need one of these guys to pan out. Quez Watkins is the guy that really is getting the most hype so far in training camp. But going back to John Hightower's Boise State tape, I thought he reminded me a little bit of John Brown in his game. Plus, he doesn't really drop that many passes. I think he had 4 drop passes on 71 targets, I believe, last year. So I know he hasn't really. He's caught 2 downfield passes in training camp so far for touchdowns. Then the practice each day, but they're on Rasul Douglas, who is accustomed to getting burnt for those type of passes as well. But to me, I think John Hightower in any other draft, I thought he was a 3rd round caliber pick. I'm not sure how high you were on him, but the Eagles desperately need one of these guys to even be like the Torrey Smith type impact to their team. So I'm hoping one of these guys finally pans out for them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think taking 2 shots, you just sort of improve your odds of that. Buying an extra lottery ticket, and yeah, I agree with that. Hightower was on a team at Boise State that had a ton of receivers, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of different guys there to throw to, and they run the ball, quite proficiently. We've seen the guys come into the NFL, and they're going to have another NFL back here, and coming to us very soon. So, the way that they play, it just didn't behoove throwing Hightower the ball more. In the same way of Alabama had a ton of receivers. They ran the ball well. You didn't see the ball go as much to Ruggs. Ruggs' utility in that offense wasn't to be the volume guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at Quez Watkins. You could argue that even though Southern Miss had a good passing attack, and Quez got his targets, their quarterback has kind of a noodle arm. He's sort of like your prototypical, this kid named Jack Abraham. He's sort of your prototypical G5 quarterback where he's very accurate, intermediate sector, short sector, whatever.
Right.
But downfield, the ball sails on him a little bit and flutters. So, Quez, as far as that aspect of his game, I don't think, it's sort of in the similar way to Darnell Mooney. He didn't get to show it quite as much as consistently throughout his career, but Quez showed that he could do a lot of different things. He was one of the G5's best receivers these past couple years, and then obviously went to the combine and showed that his athleticism was for real. So I think taking the 2 dips there, I think you're going to find something, from one of those 2 kids. I liked Hightower a little bit more, but I like both of them in college. They can both do things, and that kind of speed, you can't teach it. And that ability to make plays downfield, not every guy coming into the NFL has that. And you need it on your roster, just in terms of diversification and stuff like that, and creating space for other guys. So I like that the Eagles took a couple shots there, and I agree with you. I think there's a decent shot one of those guys pans out for them at least.
Awesome, because they desperately need it. So that would be amazing. That works out. Hopefully both work out, but if one of them works out, that'd be great. But to wrap it up real quick, just get some quick thoughts on. I know nobody's really excited about offensive linemen, but Jack Driscoll probably is the prototypical interior guy that you can use as the swing tackle, maybe perhaps. Your thoughts on him?
Yeah, Driscoll's interesting. Driscoll's a guy, if you look at his tape and you look at his PFF grading numbers, he should have gone higher.
Mm-hmm.
Playing in the best conference in college football, and he excelled over multiple years playing in a blue blood. His thing, the biggest thing is, what position does he play at the next level? What position can you lock Driscoll into long term and say, okay, that's our starter? And I think that was the disconnect between his college production and his tape and, where he ended up getting drafted. And so, I think at the very least with Driscoll, you're looking at I think Nick Punto is a utility player for the Twins. I believe he played for the Phillies as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I can use this as a metaphor. You're sort of looking at a Nick Punto, but a utility guy, but a backup offensive lineman. At the very least, that's what you're hoping that you got in Driscoll, a guy who has proven it could potentially back up to 4 spots on the line, be a swing guy, and then hopefully, if he adds some weight, which he has to do. I don't know if he has the frame to do it. But if he can add a little weight and keep moving as well as he moved at Auburn, maybe you have a little bit more there. But I think at the very least, the Eagles are looking at, a guy with a moderate ceiling and very little bust potential. Because, that's what he is. He's a solid player. The limitations there, they all have to do with his frame and his play strength. But he can move around a little bit. And like I said, he proved it in the SEC. So I think you're talking a good backup who can cover a bunch of positions at worst.
And the Eagles love Nick Punto type offensive linemen to have at their disposal. Big V just got a huge contract with the Lions, so they needed somebody to replace him. I think Driscoll's the perfect guy. But his teammate, Prince Tegawahu, I know medicals and this year was a really weird draft process. I thought was way better than a 6th-round pick. This is a guy who I watching his tape at Auburn, he handled the SEC pass rush pretty well, and especially Kayvon Chazon from LSU. I thought his reps against him were really spectacular. I know that there's some medical issues with his knee, but if Andre Dillard really flops for the Eagles, maybe they have a project guy here that they could maybe lean on.
I agree. Yeah. I was shocked during the draft when Prince kept falling, because I kept, you put out the best available, and after, the third round or whatever, maybe even, getting into the third round, Prince was always near the top of my best available list. And then he fell all the way down to where he did. I was looking for information during the draft of why this was happening. And of course, that's what came back, and I started asking people that, the knee was worse than had been let on or that we knew about in the draft media. So that's the reason that he fell. But, as far as taking him there, it's just worth the squeeze.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the upside is just worth it at that point, right? Like, even if you cut him, just from, like, sort of an odds perspective, it just makes sense to use that pick on him. He's worth it. If the knees are shot, or that affects him in some way, that affects him on the field or whatever, okay. You didn't use that higher pick on him. But, obviously he's a very raw guy. He's a native of Nigeria, and he just started playing football in high school. And so for a guy to go from that to being a top recruit to learning, offensive line play and then performing pretty well in the SEC, he did have his ups and downs. But his high-end tape, and you mentioned this, his high-end tape against some good prospects is, you can put it up there with some of the other top tackle prospects in this class. Everything's not the best with him. Again, you're going to have to teach him a lot, and you have the knee issues there. So, you have some mechanical things to work on if he's even, if he's even going to be sort of healthy and sound enough to do that. But again, where they took him, it's just juice worth the squeeze. It totally makes sense. He was worth more than that pick just on upside alone. So thumbs up on that no matter what way it goes.
Right, 6th-round flyer for potential is definitely something I'm always going to take a flyer on for sure. And Sean Bradley, these Temple small linebackers always find their way getting drafted. He kind of reminds me of Tyler Mikovich, the guy that they had back there a couple of years ago as well. He's already turning heads at training camp. Obviously he's a little more polished than Davion Taylor, so it was sort of expected. But what do you think about him? I'm still on the fence of thinking anything more than special teams, but wondering what your thoughts are on Sean Bradley.
Yeah, he's a little linebacker that just zips around, right? And again, going back to what we talked about before, athleticism, on that second level there in the defense, you don't see as much of it. Like when you want a guy who, who's going to be like a 65th, 70th, 75th percentile athlete on the second level of your defense, you're going to have to, you're either going to have to pay a little bit, or in the draft process, you're going to have to get a guy who maybe didn't prove as much in college and, sort of hope you can teach him the rest. And Bradley brings that athletic profile to the NFL. What can he become? We'll see. But he's a guy who can zip around. He can play in coverage and everything else. I think they're just going to have to teach him, but he certainly has traits. He has athletic traits, and, he plays with a certain purposefulness, on the field as well. Obviously he's a local guy. They've seen plenty of him. So, he's another interesting athlete there to add to the second level. Just see what you sort of have in him.
I'd rather buy more stock into him than I would TJ Edwards per se, and that's who the Eagles have slated to start at the Mike linebacker this year. I don't know if you were that high on TJ Edwards coming out of Wisconsin, but that's who the Eagles seem to be rolling with, that Mike linebacker for starters right now. But what do you think about him, man? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't quite as high on him, but again, they're slightly different type, player types, and so it's like, how quickly can Bradley develop, and is that sort of the direction that you want to take your defense? I think Edwards is a bit more reliable. Certainly, he has the body of work behind him a little bit more, but I think in terms of athletic upside, I think it's just in terms of again, a guy who can sort of zip around, play sideline to sideline, and you can also sort of project him to stay with tight ends and running backs in coverage. I think Bradley could be that guy. So, yeah, it's going to be kind of interesting to see the way that shakes out for sure.
Yeah, and then Casey Tuhill is probably the perfect wide nine development type defensive end. I would say. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, Tuhill's interesting, right? Like, he's a guy who came in and he tested very well.
Mm-hmm.
He opened a lot of eyes, and it's interesting that he didn't sort of develop more at Stanford. Considering the athletic specimen he is, 6'4", 250. I think he ran the 4.6s, and he had a vert near 40 inches. I'm pretty sure.
Mm-hmm.
And he did play well last season, right? Like, in his first season as a starter. So we just didn't have as much exposure to Tuhill. He was caught behind some guys and didn't get on the field until later on. But, he's a hard worker. We know he gets after it. He has that athletic profile. He also has the frame, so it's going to be interesting to see, do the Eagles want to play him on the edge? Do they want to play him at linebacker? There was, with Tuchel, he was one of those guys where there was some, disagreement and argument about what's his best position fit. But, if the Eagles can find the right spot for, and the Eagles took a few guys like this, where it's like their projection is a little bit up in the air. It's like, how do you want to use him? But he sort of has the athleticism to cover, or the frame to cover, multiple spots. It'll be interesting to see how the Eagles, see him and how they decide to deploy him. But again, just in terms of like hustle, smarts, frame, athleticism, he absolutely has the package that's worth the pick that they invested in him. So, we'll just, we're in camp now, so we'll just see what we have in him.
Yeah, I mean, he fits the athletic type edge type guy. I mean, his film suggests higher than a 7th round pick too. So I agree with you. I think they just took projection here, and I think this is the perfect defensive end for them to develop and keep in the wings, maybe practice squad for a year and see what they have next year in him. But I like that pick as well. And then a couple undrafted free agents that are really becoming fan favorites are Baylor's Grayland Arnold, who I like a lot. I hope he makes the team. I think he could be a really good over the top safety. I don't know what you think about him, but I do think he's a good free safety type prospect. And then Adrian Killens is usually where the NFL is going with these receiving scat back running backs. I think this is definitely a good practice squad stash situation for the Eagles. Maybe another Boston Scott type, Darren Sproles type project with him. And Michael Warren's just like the bruiser type back that really just here to compete with Elijah Holyfield for that role on the team. What do you think about these three?
Yeah, so Warren, I like Warren's going to be interesting to me to see how his career goes. I like Warren. I always liked watching him in college. And I probably ranked Warren just a little bit maybe higher than I should have. I knew better because he's not athletic at all. I compared him to Fat Rob of the Redskins, and that's what he's going to be a short yardage back. But he's a guy who, every time you hand him the ball, he's like fighting you off with a sock full of rocks. He's just a guy who's not fun to tackle, and he's going to grind out yards. But you're talking about a guy who immediately going to the NFL as a rookie is going to be one of the lesser athletic running backs in the league. So it's just going to be sort of interesting to see if he can carve out a short yardage role. I think that's sort of what he is. It's not very valuable in the NFL, so that's why he went undrafted. But I think he's going to be reliable, at least in terms of that. If he can find the Eagles or another team to give him that role on their roster or whatever. As far as Arnold. Arnold's a very good college player. My brother went to Baylor, so I watch a lot of Baylor football live. Very, very good player. Very good cover guy in the Big 12. His issues are limitations that God put on him. And so, he's going to be one of those guys, obviously overlooked because of this. Is he able to sort of overcome some of these, limitations that he has, athletic-wise or whatever to, become a regular contributor, at the next level. Some guys can. Nick Needham was a undrafted guy the year before who came in and contributed immediately, even though his testing numbers were terrible. We'll see about Arnold. And who was the third guy that you mentioned?
Adrian Killens, UCF. I thought he was a playmaker, so I was excited to hear that the Eagles got him.
Yeah, Killens is interesting. UCF, it's like they grow these guys on trees or something.
Right, because that's where I live by. I live right by UCF, so I've been seeing all these guys lately, and I'm like, where are these getting these guys from? They have a lot of talent lately.
Yeah, it's like UCF gets all of them, and it's like they have like 5 of them in their backfield. These guys that just sort of squirt out and they catch the ball and they can do these different things or whatever. Killens is interesting. He was caught in that, an extremely crowded backfield. So we'll see. He wasn't able to show, I think, the full extent of his skills at UCF, but he certainly has skills. We saw that he's flashed on tape and everything like that. So he does have skills, and skills that can be deployed. It's just going to be, it's up to the Eagles. Like, how do they want their sort of backfield to look behind the top couple guys? Who do you want there? You want sort of your scat back guy that can, catch the ball or whatever? Do you want more of the, the brawl and short yardage guy That's more of a philosophical issue, but I think, whatever direction they want, they have a couple different guys that they can look at to fill a back roster spot as far as a backup running back.
Absolutely. All right, guys. So that is NBC Sports, Rotoworld's lead college football and NFL draft analyst, Thor Nystrom, joining Eagles Brawl. You can follow him on Twitter at ThorKU. Find all his great articles and work right there on Twitter. Thor, thanks for joining Eagles Brawl, man. I greatly appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Connor.
What's going on, guys? It's Connor from Eagles Brawl here. Have you been struggling to find an affordable car detailing company lately? Are those noticeable scratches on your lovely vehicle making you agitated every time you see them? Well, I have just the spot for you. Check out Why Not Us Detailing, an auto detailing company serving Chester County and the Philadelphia area. From wash and wax to paint correction, Why Not Us Detailing does it all. Call 610-425-7239 to schedule your appointment today. That's 610-425-7239. You can also reach the company on Instagram by following their page, Why Not Us Detailing. Tell the guys Eagles Brawl sent you for discounts on your next automobile service. Give Why Not Us Detailing a chance to make your car shine today.